Okay, looks like we're probably good here. Hello, everyone. I'm starting actually 2 minutes early, which is very unusual for me. Um, I'm going to just get everything set up nicely here. Apologies if there's any noise. There's some dogs getting their shots today, and as it turns out, they like needles about as much as I do, which is not. Um, Welcome to the stream. I haven't streamed in months, so this is the first time in a while. As you can see, I'm in a new location. That's going to be part of the topic of the stream. There's also going to be discussion of the IBX, the Interborough Express service in New York, which I think is very exciting. Let me see, 10 seconds. I'm just adjusting a few things. Let's see. Let me see, turn this down slightly. I think that's good. Maybe that's should be good for now. Let me see, just looking at the chat here. Click on this. Weird camera angle. Well, sorry. It's where I am at my desk, trying to record here. So yeah, that's it's unfortunate. But yeah. Let's see. Tons of messages here. I'm going to wait. I'll tilt back a bit here. Let's see if that's better. It should be fine. I'm going to wait a few minutes to start, as always. And so it should be interesting. Yeah, I think it'll be a good a good go. I will respond to a few of the things in the chat. In the meantime, let me just move this over here. My internet's a lot better than I expected, so that's good. As you may have noticed, I have moved. I'm no longer in Toronto. Oh, sad. But there are lots of cool opportunities coming up, so that's exciting. And yeah, I don't really play PS5. My wife does, but I don't. I don't have much free time. I have to make videos. It takes a lot of effort. So yeah. We'll start at 5:05 in Eastern time. So in 4-ish minutes. Before then, I'm just gonna kind of look at the chat. Does wearing a Metrolinx hat mean you're still a fan of Ontario? Yes, of course I'm a fan of Ontario. Spent so many years. Why did you stop posting on Mastodon? I think Mastodon is cool. Like, it's cool that it exists, and I like elements of it, but I just find it to be a very user-unfriendly site, and I don't really want to just auto cross-post from Twitter because I like to delete my tweets, and if you don't understand that, using Twitter, often you'll get people reply like months or weeks after you tweet something, and so deleting is kind of nice because it just trims down the number of tweets that people have to reply to. At the same time, when you have a lot of followers, not trying to flex here, that becomes a bit of an issue as well. So that's why I turned it off. I'm just gonna try to avoid typing too much during this stream. Just watching the time. Looks like we're good. Let's see. What will be the next transit explained? Oh, that's such a good question. I'm thinking Rotterdam. Lots of people have wanted me to do a Rotterdam video for a long time, and so I think it'll be a good one. Sorry, I'm not looking at my camera. It's just the nature of having a lot of screens in front of you, as you end up looking all over the place. So, I'm also trying to read the chat. Would you ever go back to school to study urban planning? No, I don't think so, because I've read a lot of the urban planning literature. So, that's sort of what happens in university when you do a degree, is it's a lot of just reading the literature, writing about it, continuing. There's certainly value in getting that validated formally, but I just don't think it's really necessary for me. And actually, I kind of think that having slightly unconventional views is something that university doesn't really encourage. And so probably not. Um, are you in BC right now? I'm not going to comment on that. Not having not having auto delete set up on Mastodon is not really my reason for not using Mastodon. It's just one element. It's just overly complicated when you have a lot of platforms that you post on. I find to have another platform, and I still think that Twitter is where most of the stuff that I'm interested in is happening, and so I'm kind of like until Twitter is in the ground, I might as well stay there. And also, if you're curious, because sometimes people are, Aranciata is my drink of the day. I love Aranciata. I've enjoyed this since I was a kid, and so it's great. I really enjoy having it. Let me look. If you're just coming into the stream, I'm going to start around 5:05 Eastern time zone. And I'm going to talk about a ton of different stuff. So it's going to be a fun stream. As you can see, I'm in a new location, and for now, I'm just kind of looking at various chat messages. Someone's asking, will you do a video on the Dubai Metro? I actually had one that was quite humorous at one point. Probably not. It's kind of like Chinese metros. Like it's elevated for the most part, automated, platform screen doors, standardized. It's actually in that way sort of less interesting than some systems, but it does have interesting elements. Maybe I'll do a Middle Eastern metro video. How would you feel about teaching urban planning? That'd be cool. I really like teaching stuff. I taught in computer science when I was doing my degree in computer science, and it was like my favorite part of university. So definitely interested. Also, yeah, if you haven't seen the Stadler manufacturing video, that is this is my last video I posted. Go check that out. I think it's a good one. It's definitely worth watching. We got to tour around the factory. Stadler was really cool and kind of just opened up to us, and that was great. So yeah. Let's see. Do you think double stack intermodals would be a barrier to electrification of railways in the U.S.? No, I don't, because obviously already a thing in some places, such as in the Philadelphia area, where another transit YouTuber lives. Let's go over here. So many. Okay, I'm just gonna get to the bottom of the chat, and then I'm gonna go into various topics. I actually wrote an agenda today. I'm coming back with the streams, and I'm trying to make them of a higher quality. Besides the dogs yelping, which is because they're getting their vaccinations. Sorry about that if you hear anything. What can I do? It was a bit unexpected that was going to be happening today. So many things. You're now in fake London. That I will say, I'm not in London. Yes, the soda is good. Almost to 200,000 subscribers. Yes, I'm thinking about putting up the plaque also back here. So maybe if I should do that, let me know in the chat. Okay, let's see. Melbourne Tram Network. Oh yeah, definitely. It's just gonna take time to get there. The Vesuvia. Yes, I do want to cover it. Very, 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 very cool rail network in Italy. Let's see. I haven't done one on the Brussels pre-metro yet. Yes, I do like this hat. I think it's very cool. Thank you for the kind words on the Stadler video, Kevin. It means a lot coming from you. Oh my goodness, so many messages in the chat. Okay, I was almost at the bottom though. So, do you think the MTA made the wrong decision going with light rail? Well, that is the exact topic I will be discussing at some point later today. How did you get into urban and transit planning from computer science? So what I'm going to say is I think in a lot of fields, including urban planning, being educated in the field just isn't really necessary. And the same is true of computer science. A lot of people get software development jobs with no computer science degree, and that's fine because there's a lot of ways we can learn things. And I think that it's really important as a society that we come to grips with the fact that people don't just learn from university. And as someone who went through a traditional university degree, there's certainly ways in which university kind of fails to educate you well. And so I got into it by being passionate and by reading on my own time, watching documentaries, watching other YouTubers, of course, chatting with lots of people, including people I meet via YouTube. Kind of all of the above. It's a very decentralized thing, but it's been great. Are you going to visit Montreal to see the REM this year? I will definitely fly into Montreal and do the REM. Um, just scrolling through. I wish I could subscribe again. Yeah, if you're not subscribed, and if you haven't hit the bell icon, please do. It helps a lot. Oh, yeah. TGV is going to be covered for sure. Lots of good questions. Lazy Fluff is asking questions about being a planner, planning railways in their country, what degree to do. I'm gonna do Q&A at the end. So I'll do the main topics, and then after I'll cover that. I would love to do a video on stuff from Switzerland, and honestly, if Stadler wants to do a video with me on the Golden Pass Express route, that I think would be a very, very cool video to do because it's awesome. Yes, I will be doing a new Paris Tramways video. An accurate time for IBX discussion, I would say it'll start within the next 10 minutes. Yeah, it's pretty early in my agenda here. Okay, I'm at the bottom of the chat. So I'm just going through this now. So here's my plan for the stream today. So I'm gonna start with IBX, talking about it. I'm gonna then reflect on the neighborhood I was living in Toronto, because now that I'm not living there, I can talk about it openly without feeling like, hey, this is maybe not the best idea to talk about publicly. And then I'm going to talk about like moving a bit, and the channel in the future, and then I'll end it with the Q&A. So I think that will be good, and I'll just kind of monitor the chat. This is truly the best. So good. But don't want to put a drink on my desk and get the drink circle, from the condensation. Okay. IBX, yes. So the main transit topic of today is New York's Interborough Express, which is a new new in quotes. It's an orbital rail, or potentially would have been bus transit service, which will operate through Brooklyn and Queens, basically going to Roosevelt Avenue. Is it 71st? I'm sorry, I'm just not that much of that deeply intimately familiar with New York, given I don't actually live in New York, and so I believe it's Roosevelt. Sorry, I'm out of focus. Trying to get my camera to focus here. Okay, maybe I'm gonna be out of focus. Who knows? It goes from the 7 train south through Queens into Brooklyn, and then ends up at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, roughly, kind of on the water. Yes, no old apartment tour for someone who's asking. Sorry about that. But yeah, the IBX, ton of potential. 84th Street, there you go, wonderful. The IBX has a ton of 74th. There we go. The IBX has a ton of potential because New York really lacks for orbital transit. There is the G train. I took the G train when I was in New York in November, which was nice enough. It is an IND route, so the infrastructure is surprisingly quite impressive. The route's basically all underground until you get through Brooklyn from Queens. But yeah, it's impressive, and the train was busy, but the service is infrequent, which is bad. Infrequent service is just sort of like putting negative pressure on transit ridership. Just like, can we get less people to get on transit? Because that's what happens when you operate a low frequency service. It's just that little bit less convenient and a little bit less likely that you want to take it. So that's not great. The other issue with the G train is it's basically as close to Manhattan as you could get without actually being in Manhattan. Like it's right along the waterfront, essentially. Not quite on the waterfront, but not far from the waterfront. But it's also not that well connected, such as at the north end. I actually got on at the north end, and you don't have that interchange with the 7, for example, which is one of the premier New York City subway routes. And so there's a lot of issues with the G as an orbital route, and it's not really orbital so much as it's a very inner route, right? So a true orbital route has a lot of value, especially because the routes. I'm saying route a lot. The subway lines, many of them elevated, go much further out into the boroughs, and so it's still not optimal for people who want to interchange between them to travel all the way in and then across and then back out or in, and so. And so that's not optimal. And so having a route that's much further out is nice, and that's kind of the value of the IBX. There is an existing rail route that has freight service, but a lot of the route doesn't have much freight service. It exists basically, but it's not super heavy. There's talk of maybe making it heavier, but the point is that there is an existing right of way that that some transit service could be spun up on. And so the MTA did a study. They concluded that it could either be bus rapid transit, uh, which seems kind of silly to me, or light rail, or is there a is there an in-station interchange between the G and the 7? Um, Service being every 10 minutes. Yeah, like it's okay, but I think every 10 I don't think is great because the reason I don't like every 10 for a route like this is because it is heavily dependent on interchanging passengers, and especially for a passenger who has to interchange twice, like you're, I don't know, okay, say taking the 7 to the G and then switching and then going south and then switching again to, say, I don't know, something in Brooklyn. Those headways are adding up a lot, which is just not great. So in station at Court Square. For some reason, I felt like Court Square didn't have the 7 wasn't at Court Square, but okay, there you go. It shows what I know. But let's scroll through this a bit more so I can go further along. So the point is, the MTA ended up deciding that they wanted to do light rail, and I think it shows a lot that when the mainline rail option, if we can call it that, the heavy rail option, is meant to be, or was referred to as, commuter rail, which is really disturbing because commuter rail in North America typically means one direction in the morning, one direction in the afternoon. Of course, that's not the plan and never was the plan, but it sort of shows the general thinking around the service. It's not ideal, right? To have this mindset of this is commuter rail. No, this is like the least commuter rail possible service. It's all about connecting other routes for transit riders who potentially are going to various places in the city that generally wouldn't be a traditional 9 to 5 commute because it's not going into the traditional 9 to 5 office worker city center. So I talked a bit about this. I didn't want to make an entire dedicated video about the IBX because I don't know, there was a lot of debate going on, etc. But I did make a video about orbital light rail, and I sort of came to the conclusion in the orbital light rail video that there are certain conditions where it makes sense and certain conditions where I would say it makes less sense. And in the case of London and Stockholm, and probably as well in Paris, they do have orbital light rail routes, which get referred to a lot when talking about the IBX. But they're very different from the IBX in that they were built incredibly cheaply, several times cheaper than the IBX. And in most cases, they have a lot of street running. Tramlink in London has a fair amount of street running. The Tvärbanan in Stockholm still does have a decent amount of street running. And the same is obviously true of T3 in Paris, T3A and B. I believe it's T3, right? which is basically all street running. So not super fast. Whereas in the case of New York, there's already basically a dedicated rail right of way with a few places that are a bit problematic where you'd have to figure out a solution, right? So um, that's a big part of the problem. Uh, I don't know, Long Branch Mike. I'm gonna have to debate you about that later on in the stream. Uh, so uh Pow has a very interesting comment. So, anyways, I did an orbital light rail video. I didn't mention the IBX, but I basically said, in the case that you were spending a lot of money, you should probably do something more. You look at Toronto with Eglinton Crosstown. Um, you look at Washington D.C. with the Purple Line. It's technically Maryland, but it's Washington D.C. And they're spending a lot of money to get not a ton of service, essentially. And so you would hope that New York would do something smarter, but I don't think that's the decision that was made. And the reason I see light rail is just not the best solution in this case is that you're spending most of the money to do something more substantial in terms of service and capacity, but then you're getting substantially less service and capacity. And the assumption being made is that ridership will be able to be supported by light rail, but it's so critical to tell people and to remind planners that the amount of ridership on a transit service is dependent on what the mode is. If you have a bus line directly next to a rail line, the rail line could have very similar actual performance to the bus line, but could move a lot more people because it's a more attractive service. And so the idea that light rail is sufficient is sort of self-confirming or self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, we're going to build light rail, it's going to have less ridership than potentially an option that could operate much more frequently, like light metro, for example, which I do think would be a better choice in this case. A lot of the benefits of light rail in terms of small stations, using the existing right-of-way could still be had, but you would be able to actually save you'd be able to so you basically be able to save a lot of the money that you can save with light rail, but you'd be able to get a lot more benefit. You could have a train going every 2 minutes, which is just going to be so much more attractive to people as a service that you're largely not starting your trip on, but you're passing through on. Now, to be fair, maybe for light rail it will be the case that a lot of riders start their trip on the line, but as I mentioned in my orbital light rail video, I think that would just be because light rail is going to be kind of less competitive in terms of frequency and speed than metro or something else. Like, I think the fact that the option was termed commuter rail really left out the potential for something like the London Overground, which I think being on the Overground like less than a year ago. I don't live in London, sorry. Yes, I'm not in London, as I mentioned. Those large trains with lots of space for seating, etc., they're just so much more comfortable than a modern light rail vehicle, like the ones I rode in Salt Lake City or the ones I've ridden in Toronto. Uh, Light rail vehicles just they have to be slightly less uncomfortable or slightly less comfortable inside to fit all of the equipment, and that makes sense in some cases. But I just don't think in the case of the IBX the trade-off was worth it, or is going to be worth it. You can have higher speed light rail. That's obviously possible, but if you had metro, there would be, especially automated or something with a CBTC system, you could have had passing loops. You could have had some express services and some local services, and that would work within the headway constraints of what light rail was even going to do, because it was never going to be, or it isn't planned to be that frequent. I think what peak headways are 5 or 7 minutes, which is half of what you would have with a metro service. It just sort of feels like this is the solution that might have made sense 20 years ago, before automated systems were really broadly used across different cities. And I don't know, especially at the high price, I find it hard to justify. But I'm going to actually address my opinion and critique my own opinion here, so you can get maybe both sides of the argument here. Because I've been thinking about this issue of the optimal solution for transit projects a lot, and I've tried to be a bit more considerate of the various different perspectives on this issue. Let me just see Okay. I one more point. Uh, Apparently, part of the reason for light rail being needed is because some tunneling works would be needed for a heavier mode of rail, and the MTA was like, well, hey, we want to be able to build this project, right? So we have to not do the tunneling and do light rail. But the issue here is that, again, the MTA is not addressing the actual problem they have, which is that transit projects cost an insane amount of money to build. As someone already mentioned in the comments, this isn't a light rail route that has essentially an entire dedicated route already created. There's some expansion and moving tracks around required, but you have a route that is basically got a dedicated transit right of way, and it's costing $6 billion still. That is crazy, and that's a huge problem. And the fact that that's the case is the problem, not the fact that you might have to expand a tunnel. If this was Spain, for example, even if, say, they chose light rail, they would have had a much more compelling option to build metro as an alternative, or to build like an interurban style service, or I don't know, a London Overground style service, because it would have cost so much less money, because they can do these things for less. It would have been more cost effective, and so I think that would have been a huge change, and something that would have been really great to see. Another big issue is that it seems that the option being chosen is sort of infrastructure light. Like, the quality of a lot of the connections to intersecting subway and other routes are not going to be amazing, and that's fine if the project cost, I don't know, even $1 billion, like $1 billion for, what is it, 20 odd kilometers of new electric rail. That would seem reasonable to me. Maybe high, but for New York, that seems like a really good deal. But when you're paying $5 or $6 billion, you're getting light rail, so you're not getting super high headways, and the trains are just not as comfortable as they might otherwise be. Which, to be fair, an argument can be made that you're not going to be on those trains for very long, so that might be fine. But my problem is that so much money is being spent that you expect more from this project, and you're not really getting it. But let me reflect on this. Channel updates are going to be talked about later, someone is asking. The IBX isn't elevated, but it is basically entirely grade separated from roadways. So again, yes, light rail doesn't make a ton of sense, and there are ways you can work around the freight. But I digress. The issue here, and this is the issue with a lot of my videos, but also just a lot of transit advocacy in general, because I see it in Toronto too, and so I understand how someone in New York could feel this way. When people comment on what is the optimal solution, what is the best solution, I am confident that something like, I don't know, the Copenhagen City Ringen or the Taipei Circle Line would be way better for New York than the current light rail IBX plan. And it's really easy for me to say that from not in New York. And I think that there's always that effect, right? When you have someone who's an outsider giving opinions on a project or giving a sort of critique, they're just going to come to different conclusions. That's not a bad thing. There's a lot of good things about that. If you want to know the optimal solution, it's kind of good to be a little outside of the local context, because it can help you see things differently. You can maybe there's the Overton window is wider than it might be for a local, but at the same time, if I was, say, living in Queens right now, and I was using one of the crosstown buses, and to be fair, I took the bus to LaGuardia when I was in New York. I took it to and from LaGuardia, and it sucked. It was super stuck in traffic the whole time. And while the bus itself was okay, being stuck in traffic sucked. And so it's easy for me to say that you guys should just build a metro, or you guys should just build London Overground, when I'm not in New York. And so I don't have to deal with the suckitude of day-to-day bus travel in New York on a lot of these routes. But if you do, just the logic of what's the best option is different. And this applies everywhere. It's the same as sort of, like, you can bring this up for the REM. And I think I would make the case that I would apply this logic to the REM, which is that from the outside, converting your really nice, mostly really nice, it needs a lot of work, cross-city rail tunnel, converting it to a lighter technology that's automated and separate from the national railway network, well, that seems like kind of you're wasting this huge opportunity. But if you're in Montreal, there's this practicality, this consideration that hey, if we don't convert it, it's possible that we get this really good solution, but what's the likelihood of that? Maybe they're never going to actually build that. And so you have a sort of what if scenario that you are basing a lot of your benefit on versus a very real benefit with the RAM. And it's the same thing for New York. It's very possible that New York would never build an automated metro or a London Overground style service, even if it makes a lot of sense. New York hasn't built really any of those things before, and I would argue that basically no city in the United States has. Honolulu is strangely the innovator here, but Hart has so many problems. So, considering that, maybe the choice is between crappy bus or light rail. And let's be honest, I don't think anyone watching this would rather be on a bus that sucks versus there's a one tunnel per mountain Reese. I don't know what that's referring to, but anyways, basically, uh, it's easy to say that there's this better solution when that solution isn't a realistic solution that might happen. It's sort of like the Nirvana fallacy, right? Like we could have this, it could be so much better. Sure, but maybe it's just not a realistic option that the government would decide to actually build. And if that's the case, well, you can't really compare an option that isn't going to be built with ones that is. Now, does this mean that it isn't possible and that New York truly never would have built it? I don't think so. I think that the right people getting in the room could have been convinced, but when you're outside, it's a lot easier to kind of justify, hey, like let's keep debating this forever and never actually build a project. Than if you're in the city and every year it's not built is another city you don't actually get to use that project and it doesn't benefit you day to day. I'm sure a lot of people, if they could choose, if you didn't have a car and your street somehow didn't have a bus, you'd probably choose a bus starting next year to a metro starting in 50 years because 49 years of actually having an option is better than waiting decades for something that might later come. So that's sort of my logic on a lot of these projects. There are more considerations that need to obviously be made than just the technical viability and the quality of different solutions. And so while I don't think light rail makes a lot of sense for the IBX, I wish there were better connections. I can understand how someone might say that, hey, this is all we're getting. I would rather light rail than nothing. So that's my thinking on that. If you want to read more about it, I have an article on my Substack. If you're not subscribed to my Substack, you can subscribe for free, and a lot of my articles are completely free. So it's worth subscribing to just get information from me on a regular basis. See what's going on with different transit projects in different places. I could talk a bit more freely in Substack because I just have a smaller audience. It's a bit more of a tight knit community. So definitely recommend folks to subscribe there. Let me scroll down a bit. So conclusion on the IBX, and then I will also watch if people have specific questions or comments on the IBX, then I'll try to respond to those or about New York in general. Otherwise, and then I'll start going through other topics at the same time. Basically, I guess my conclusion with this project is IBX. It's good that New York is getting more rail transit. It's obviously sorely needed, but $5 billion for a light rail line just feels like a bad deal. I mean, I hate to argue with someone about that. I just don't think it's a good deal, and I think that the real debate shouldn't be whether New York is getting transit or not. It should be why is a light rail line costing $5 billion on an entirely pre-existing corridor that has to have rebuilds done, etc. Another issue with light rail that has been quite reasonably brought up by people is that extending it into the Bronx, which is obviously a really valuable project, is going to be much more difficult because of various regulatory reasons with the Hell's Gate Bridge and interaction with heavier freight traffic. Having something like a London Overground train would probably make that a lot easier, but bad planning. That should be a pretty key part of the planning for the first phase, in my opinion, thinking about how can we extend it in the future and choosing a technology that might be really good locally, but the second you want to extend it, it becomes completely impractical. That would be a bad idea, in my opinion, but it seems like what's happening. So just looking at the chat here. I just don't think BRT is a good solution for a city as expensive as New York. Operating buses is incredibly expensive. So yeah, Auckland is also spending a ton of money on questionable stuff. I don't think Auckland should be burying light rail. Auckland as a city is big enough to justify something much more substantial. Do you think the IBX as a light rail can kickstart a full streetcar network? I mean, it's possible, but and this is a bit of a controversial opinion, but I don't think streetcars make a lot of sense in many U.S. cities. New York maybe because it is a fairly dense city, but there's a reason that a lot of legacy streetcar routes had so many problems in the years leading up to their unfortunate removal. And that's because they weren't very fast and they weren't providing a very compelling service. And some of that was because of declining kind of track quality and equipment quality, but some of it was just because an on street alignment naturally limits how fast you can go. And I think that in a city like New York, there is a reasonable case to be made that instead of like building trams everywhere, you should just build good bikeways or something like that. So that's what I would say to that. Do a video about rethink NYC's plan for Penn Station. Maybe that sounds interesting. Let's just look. So Isaiah's saying that they said no to a Bronx expansion due to Penn Station access using the capacity of the outer tracks. I didn't think Penn Station access or Penn access was going to use the other tracks going across the Hell's Gate Bridge and going up the Northeast Corridor. Are they actually going to use the other tracks? Because I thought that they were going to operate the trains intermixing with the Amtrak trains. Is that not the case? And I guess because if it's not the case, that's kind of strange. Um, but yeah, it's weird. CDLTO makes an awesome point here. This is a point that I think is so important to highlight to people. Transit was definitely better in the 1950s, but that doesn't mean that the solution today in 2023 is to rebuild the transit network of 1950. The world has changed, different technologies are available, etc. You're saying they need a new bridge. I'm confused why they would need a new bridge. I don't think Amtrak operates that much service that the bridge would be at capacity, and I don't think Metro North currently, like, there's not currently other services besides Amtrak using the Hell's Gate Bridge, right? Besides freight. And it's quad track. I know that two of the tracks I don't think get used, but I'm still confused about what's the plan. Are they reactivating tracks? Is it just two tracks and they can't fit it in? I'm not clear. Yeah, Rethink NYC, that might be better as a Substack. They're not building a second bridge like adjacent to the Hell's Gate Bridge though for Penn access, because then it wouldn't be an inexpensive project that they're actually going to get built soon. They're using Hell's Gate Bridge for it, right? I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm 99.9% sure that I'm not wrong on this, that they're not building a new bridge. And I don't think they need a second bridge because, again, I don't think they're using all four tracks on the current bridge. Yeah, CSX does also use it, but I imagine the service level is not that intense. Yes, IBX does sound like IBS, and that also is not a great branding decision. Let's see. I would just say to Jeremy here, who's mentioning that it sounds like maybe there's an MTA report that says this is a reason they can't expand service to the Bronx. A lot of transit reports make just the assumptions they use are not reasonable. Okay, one track is out of service, and there are 4 track beds over Hell's Gate. I mean, honestly, you could do a frequent rail service with a single track over the bridge as long as you had two tracks on both sides. But I don't expect that to happen. But there are various options. Do you think the IBX will have capacity issues further down the line? I think, as I said earlier, as I said earlier, the issue is that if you build light rail versus another type of service, you're artificially pushing down the demand because it's going to be slower and there's potential for getting delayed by traffic and the vehicles are less comfortable. So you're pushing down demand for that transit service, independent of whether it's valuable or not. Yeah, three tracks now with room for four. Definitely room for more train service over the Hell's Gate Bridge. And I'm sure Amtrak doesn't use 24 trains per hour worth of capacity that could theoretically be used on a bridge like that. Maybe 20. That's still a lot. And yeah, you can definitely do a lot with one track, as CDLTO is saying. I'll keep monitoring the chat, but I'm going to move on to my next topic, which is talking a bit about terrible capacity is equal to no capacity. People just won't use it. I don't think light rail is terrible, though. I just think that light rail is a less good option than some of the alternative options. So I don't think it's going to get zero ridership. I think it's just going to get less ridership than it otherwise could. Anyways, I'm going to talk about my move a bit. So if you're unfamiliar, which most people probably were, but I did meet a lot of RMTransit viewers while walking around my neighborhood. I, for the last over a year, had been living in a neighborhood in Toronto called Christie Pitts. That's roughly what I imagine the neighborhood name to be. It's actually kind of in between other neighborhoods, and that's what Google Maps calls it, but whether that's actually what the neighborhood I was living in is called, unclear. But I was living in this neighborhood. I wanted to give a bit of a review of the neighborhood since I don't live there anymore, and maybe other people might consider moving to Toronto, and they're like, hey, should I live in Christie Pitts? Well, Reese did a review of it, so now I know. So let's look. How was Christie Pitts overall? I would give it a thumbs up overall, especially where I was living, which was kind of near DuPont Street. Huge benefit of living there, lots of grocery stores. Whenever you're moving somewhere, particularly if you want to live car free like I do, then you should really consider living close to a grocery store, because even if you have a cart and the like, you can really feel it. If you're carrying a lot of groceries and you don't want to feel that weight on your back if you're carrying a backpack, or just you don't want to drag a cart through the snow, living really close to a grocery store is awesome. It's also awesome if you love food and you just want, hey, I ran out of my Italian orange sodas. I want to get more. And if the grocery store is next door, well, you can just pop in and it will be great. IBX questions you can keep sending in, and I'll kind of respond to them as I come to them. Yes, apparently neighbors with Jordan Peterson, which is a bit crazy. Christie Pitts as a neighborhood definitely does have excellent Korean food, because Koreatown in Toronto is kind of along Bloor between Bathurst and Christie. So that's awesome. Gotta love the Korean food. And the other nice thing about it is the transit access is pretty good. You can walk down to the Bloor subway in about 10 minutes. You can walk east to the University subway in about 15 minutes, which I ended up doing a lot because service is better than on the Bloor subway, and because I just think that Line 1 is nicer, that the trains are nicer, the stations are in better condition, etc. So I ended up doing that a lot. Now, there are some buses in the Christie Pitts area, but unfortunately, they're incredibly unreliable. The DuPont bus is always pretty heavily used whenever I would ride it, and I did ride it now and then, but it's just so inconsistent. You basically have to just check next bus and see if a bus is coming. There's no point in expecting it to follow a schedule, because it doesn't, and it runs about every 20-30 minutes, so it's just not that reliable and consistent, and so while I would have liked to use it, I could not. The Christie bus, which is a short route, and this summarizes so many of the problems with Toronto Transit in a nutshell. The Christie bus is the whole route maybe takes 15 minutes for the bus to go across. Probably less, probably like 12 minutes. There's very little traffic. It's not a long route. There's not a lot of stops. And yet, this bus, which runs between two subway stations, which means if it was consistent, it would be incredibly useful because a lot of connectivity there. It's so inconsistent. You can wait at one of the terminals for 25 minutes and a bus won't show up. Won't show up. Despite the fact that the route is so incredibly short. The schedule is not adhered to. Buses kind of come and go when they please. And it's just such an incredible summary of the way that the TTC doesn't seem to care at all about operations, and it really makes people suffer. I kind of refer to the Christie bus as a bus for people who can't walk for some reason. Like if you have a mobility impairment, or if you're a senior citizen, there's a big hill on the route, or if you just have like a big box with you, the Christie bus is probably what you're going to want to take. But it's just so unreliable that you are 99.9% of the time better off to just walk. You'll be there faster, even uphill. So that's very rough. And actually, depending on your trip, you might end up walking uphill both ways, which would really suck. Now, the Ossington bus is another bus in the area, and it's also very unreliable. Often buses leave the terminal one after the other, which is just bad. It's just bad on a basic level. If you don't want bunching, don't start from a station, a terminal, bunched. So that was a big problem. The Christie bus is just the bus on Christie Street in Toronto. Yeah, so it's just a short bus route in Toronto that is very frustrating, that I was living near before I moved. So yeah. Also, the Urbanity is in the chat, which is very cool. I am a big fan of their channel for sure. Yes, if people ask more questions about IBX, I'll probably chat about them. But now I'm just talking about my old neighborhood I lived in Toronto and some of the service and my move. I should also say, just because I'm frustrated with it, a prominent city planning figure, not just in Toronto but in Canada, was talking to, and this is just more kind of broad frustration with Toronto, but it was one of the things that drove me to move. A very famous city planning figure and transit planning figure in Toronto and Canada was kind of, I guess I wouldn't say debating, but I was going back and forth with them on Twitter a few days ago, and they said, and this is someone who has a lot of responsibility in the transit planning space, or at least did. They said that the value or the potential ridership of regional rail in the Toronto region, something which I have spent years covering on this YouTube channel, was low. And this kind of weird planning attitude that we have in Toronto, where planners don't even believe that transit can be successful, even when it is very successful in the city they're talking about, Toronto, is just so frustrating. And this is something that you run up against all the time, I find, in Toronto. People who work in the transit industry, who are unfamiliar with Toronto's successes today, but who are also sort of, they believe that transit cannot be successful in the future, that we shouldn't really expand transit because it's just not going to be successful. And then you make that policy. It's incredibly frustrating. And what's even more frustrating is when they don't actually have all of the details about the project. So this person was saying that, it's going to be trains every 15 minutes in both directions, which just isn't accurate. The service is going to be much better than that. And they sort of said like, hey, you're probably not familiar with it. You should Google it to me and look it up and learn about this project. But of course, I've made many videos about it. Anyways, this might sound very strange. Who are you referring to? The point doesn't really matter. It's just that the formal planning and like professional planning, professional transportation planning circles in Toronto are deeply messed up. And this isn't just the case in Toronto. But what frustrates me about it is that in Toronto, I feel bad that they don't know better. Toronto is a city in North America where transit, for the most part, actually works. And to see that our professional planners have sort of accepted this attitude of people won't take transit, they're just going to drive, and so we should just design the city in such a way that the only transit routes we build are for people who have no option but to drive, is incredibly frustrating. And yeah, I don't know what to say about that, but that was a very, very challenging discussion to have. I do want to finish off my discussion about the neighborhood of Christie Pitts, where I was living in Toronto. go look at that on Google Maps if you're interested. What neighborhood would Reese choose to live in, car free in Toronto? I kind of already mentioned the transit options are pretty good. You can walk to the subway, which you're going to want to do because the buses are unreliable. They exist, and some of them are semi-frequent, but they are not consistent at all. Um, I would actually very much concur with what CDLTO says here about Toronto, which is that Europe, like Toronto, has European level transit usage in terms of the percentage of trips completed on transit, but the planners and politicians act in a sort of American way. And they sort of learned that from, I think, the American transit and planning discourse, which is very frustrating. And I don't think it's actually a political thing. It's not about one party of politicians versus another, because this comes from both sides of the aisle. Unfortunately, it's the framework on which everything else is built up on. So the left wing people and the right wing people, their fundamental assumptions that transit is doomed to fail are the exact same. And they build everything based on that. It's just that maybe the right wing politicians want to build different transit than the left wing politicians. But it actually doesn't really have a lot to do with politics, which I find crazy. Someone's saying, what were the other neighborhoods in Toronto that you would consider that seemed very walkable or transit reliable? I think Riverdale is definitely a good neighborhood if you're close to the subway. Again, local transit options in Toronto are just not super consistent, right? Yeah, so that's a huge issue. Actually, buses in Toronto's suburbs, like in places like Scarborough and Etobicoke, are way better than in downtown or central Toronto. In central Toronto, it kind of seems like the assumption is you're meant to walk or cycle to a subway station and get on the subway, because the streetcars and buses are totally inconsistent and not very fast. But way out in the suburbs, they're actually both pretty fast and pretty consistent and very frequent. So even if they're not to schedule, it doesn't really matter. Let's scroll through this. I'm just monitoring. So I've kind of talked about my neighborhood in Toronto. I do want to finish one last point, and then I see a few questions. I'll respond to those. The last thing I will say about Christie or Christie Pits as a neighborhood is good cycling infrastructure. I have a bike share pass. Not that I'm going to really be using it now, but it got a lot of use because there are excellent bike lanes, or sort of a shared street on Shaw Street in that neighborhood. And Bloor Street has its dedicated bike lanes, which get blocked, which is they get blocked constantly, which is very frustrating. But for the most part, you can use them fairly easily. And Shaw Street is a dream to cycle on. The only issue is there's not a ton on Shaw Street, and so it's mostly a north-south connector. But these cycling options overall are pretty good, and so I think that's something I enjoyed about the neighborhood. I'm going to talk about Move here, but there's a few questions, and someone sent a super chat. Thank you. I'm going to respond to that. Let me pull this down. I have an agenda I'm working off of today. I'm trying to make these streams a bit more coordinated. If you're curious about the IBX stuff, too, watch my orbital light rail video. I don't mention IBX because I was like, not going to talk about this second, but you should watch that. I think it's relevant. You should also read my Substack, which I have pinned in the chat. Puffy Pigeon, thanks for the super chat. I appreciate it. Do you think maglevs can work in the Windsor-Quebec corridor as a viable intercity transportation system if complemented by a good high-speed rail network? Well, I think that, we're talking a lot. If we're going to be doing a maglev, I think we should learn from the only other place that is really serious about an intercity maglev, which is Japan, which is build a conventional rail route first. And given the expense of doing that, even if it probably shouldn't cost that much, getting back to talk of how we build stuff for way too much money in North America, I think you do have to start with a conventional route. And then if you need more speed / capacity, because usually these projects are about both. They're not like, if you look at Japan, the bullet trains were created just as much for capacity as for speed, and some would argue more for capacity than speed. The same thing should be true in most corridors. If you want to add capacity, add another service level, add a higher speed service that provides something different while also providing more capacity. Yes, Substack is where I post my articles. Thank you for the super chat again. Start with regular high-speed rail. If we eventually needed more capacity, etc., then maybe it's worth considering doing maglev. other neighborhoods in Toronto. I'll just say Northwark Center is another neighborhood I really like. It's Yonge Street through it is not the most pedestrian friendly street or cyclist friendly, but I believe there's going to be bike lanes. There's actually some nice cafes on the sidewalks, which are fairly wide, which is unique for Toronto, and good subway access. Plus, it's actually like a 15-minute community. There are grocery stores, easy walking distance from most of the places you might consider living there. So, despite the fact that people think it's weird because it's high rises and then there's a lot of like low density single family around that, I think it's an awesome neighborhood. So definitely worth checking out. I will do a transit explained on Barcelona because obviously Barcelona is an awesome city. I have to cover it. I have visited Delhi, but I have not. I have not in a long time. The RRTS is really opening in 2 weeks. That seems soon. Yeah, another just great comment from CDLTO. 30-minute headways, and this speaks about any transit network. You're always going to have routes that have 30-minute or 20-minute or hopefully not 40-minute, but maybe hourly headways. You're always going to have some low frequency services for low demand places or places that just barely justify transit. But when you do have low frequency, and I've made a video talking about this before, when your frequency drops to a certain point, the frequency starts mattering less than the actual consistency. If you come on time, the actual amount of time people have to wait is very low, even if the frequency is super low, because people can just hang out in a coffee shop or hang out at home and then walk out and get your bus. But if it's inconsistent, well, then you have to wait at the bus stop for your bus, and that is not fun. I'm not sure maglev really works anywhere. Well, Japan is trying it, so we shall see. We shall see. Don't fixate on transit commute mode share. I'm not talking about commute mode share. I'm just talking about mode share in general. What is a bad wait time to wait at a park and ride? Well, park and ride is less bad because you parked, so you probably have a car where you can wait warm and not rained on. 6 more weeks-ish before the REM opens. Yeah, it's unclear when the REM is opening. I think it could open quite soon. I don't know that it could be. It could be 6 weeks, but it could be sooner. It could be later. I have to give a shout out for the good comments. We have some super chats I will reply to here, and then I'm going to cover the last topic, and then I'll do Q&A to end off the stream. Centric Cashew 64 says New York subway conductors make $86,000. Watch on YouTube, Google it. Yeah, subway conductors get paid a lot, but I think that's probably fine. I mean, I think New York probably should go to one-person train operation at some point in the future, like other cities have. But I'm fine with people who are responsible for an enormous train being paid well. I think that's fine. And I think it helps to reduce the likelihood of staff shortages, which are really just shortages of jobs paid well enough. Are there any plans to divert the Milton GO line? This is from Carlin Thomas. Thank you for the super chat. Are there any plans to divert the Milton GO line to Square One or Mississauga City Centre? Would regional rail be viable along the 407? It has been proposed by Jonathan English in the Toronto Regional Board of Trade Transit or like regional rail report. It's not a formal plan, and I think that it's one of those issues where kind of the professional planning establishment in North America would say, hey, this is like not a practical project. The Milton line is diesel today. It uses giant commuter trains. You couldn't build a diversion. The implication of building like a regional rail diversion is that if you actually operated it like a modern regional rail line that you see in Europe or Asia, the smaller trains, the electrification would allow you to do a project both less expensively but also with way more ridership, thus justifying the project. But I just don't know that we're going to see that in Toronto as much as I would like us to, or in Mississauga. It's all the Toronto region to me. Well, saying I think maglev debates is kind of typical of North America isn't really true because it's also something that got a fair amount of airtime in Japan and also obviously in Germany. Japan is literally building a high-speed intercity maglev. Okay, I'm going to respond to this last super chat, and then I'm going to go on to my last topic. Thank you again to Puffy Pigeon. Do you see Toronto Transit heading in the right direction or wrong direction currently? I think that I think that we're building good projects, not perfect projects. There's a lot we could improve on. Building a lot of projects is good, and it is true that we're doing that. Everything else needs work. The lack of fare integration, the lack of wayfinding integration, the lack of service integration. Where buses don't need to stop at a border between cities and should just continue. This should be a top priority. Platform screen doors, we don't have them. We should. New projects should have them as a default, like cities around the world have done for decades. Service, we need to just get more serious about it. As I mentioned, multiple bus routes that just don't even operate to schedule. What gives? Why is service so unreliable? Why are buses leaving the terminal one after another? That's basic operations 101, and we just can't seem to get that right. And TTC leadership is not very visible on these issues. I don't think I've seen the TTC CEO ever talking about the unreliability of the system and problems the system has. And that was certainly something Andy Byford did. Like before I had even moved to Toronto, I remember watching a YouTube video of Andy Byford apologizing to commuters for providing bad service. We need that level of responsibility, especially from a CEO who's a highly paid person who's being paid to lead the system. And they need to be setting a good example with responsibility and operating an excellent service for customers and for passengers and for the city. So I think Toronto is doing some things right, but I think we really have to get serious about the basics, which is sad 5 or 7 years after Andy Byford came in and fixed a lot of that stuff. We've let it all go, and that's a really, really sad thing. Do we know when we'll find out what is happening as for rail transit to or from YYZ Airport? I'm going to just note this, and I'm going to come back to it after I'm done this last topic. So last topic of the day is the move. Everyone's asking about the move. The first thing I'll say is if you're not familiar, I have moved, as you can see. I set up my stuff again, my little Lego crocodile locomotive and my London Underground sign, inspired by CDLTO. Actually, I've set them up again so I can film in a way that looks very similar to previous videos. So that's all the same. But yeah, I've moved. Toronto is getting really frustrating for me for a lot of various reasons. I'm going to be back in Toronto lots, so I'm still going to cover Toronto on the channel. I just can't be in Toronto all the time because it's become very frustrating for me. So if you want to hear more about that, I've linked my Substack at the top of the chat. Go subscribe. It's free. Most articles are free. Some are for subscribers, but you don't have to pay for most of the articles. Go check out the post I did about leaving Toronto. I think you'll find it interesting. So yeah, that's a thing that's happening. As I mentioned before in the stream, it's really frustrating in Toronto to hear the professional planning establishment and a lot of people who are supposed to be responsible for high-level planning just saying stuff that's crazy, like that regional rail doesn't have ridership potential, or talking about plans in a way that they're integrated when they're not integrated, and just kind of showing a general lack of knowledge on the context of Canadian transit or of Toronto transit or of global transit. A big part of the reason I made this YouTube channel is because I wanted people who were not familiar with transit around the world, whether they be from Europe, Asia, or Toronto, or anywhere else in North America. I want people to think about places that aren't just the city they live in, because that's how you can learn what works, what doesn't work, and what multiple cities have tried and has failed or has worked. I just think that it's really sort of an arrogant view to have that just because it works in other cities doesn't mean it will work here. And cities that have that attitude, like Toronto and New York, just tend to have worse transit outcomes than cities that don't. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that the transit planning field, while it has done some good stuff, has also failed us in a lot of places, and we need to ask more questions. And so that's a big part of my frustration and why I decided to move from Toronto. But of course, there is a lot going on in Toronto. I have a huge audience in Toronto, and there's just tons of projects. So I'm going to be covering it no matter what. As I mentioned earlier, I already have lots of flights back to Toronto booked, so should be good. I also have a very exciting behind the scenes video coming out soon on Toronto Transit. Not the TTC, though, sadly. I've never formally interacted with the TTC in my years living in Toronto, and that makes me sad because I feel like the TTC does some stuff well, for sure, and I'm critical of the TTC sometimes. I'm also positive about the TTC when they do things well, which is fairly often. I talk about the positive nature of the frequent bus service in Toronto all the time. Okay, I guess this is a part of the video where I complain a bit about the TTC as a transit YouTuber. There is no reason that any transit agency needs to invite me to come do behind the scenes videos or something. I'm not entitled to it at all, citizen or not. That is just not something that people get to demand. But it is frustrating that living in Toronto, no matter how many times I emailed the TTC or reached out to various people, I was never able to make a behind the scenes video on the system talking about various elements. And yet I get invited to cities literally all over the place in other cities where I can go behind the scenes. I can talk to people from the agency. It's great. I feel like really welcomed. And yet in Toronto, I couldn't get that access. And again, not something that I should get. Like, there's no reason that anyone has to give it to me. It is not an obligation that exists for anyone. But when deciding to leave Toronto, it sort of felt like, hey, like, you're getting snubbed in the city you live in, and you spend so much time generally advocating that, hey, like, the TTC isn't perfect, but it has great frequent bus service in the suburbs, and the subway is actually, it's really well used. So that's, years of frustration of that. And I think that the most frustrating thing about sort of the relationship between transit agency and someone who's talking about it is, I'm supportive of transit, but you have to be critical of the things that a transit system is getting wrong if you want the system to get better and to attract riders who aren't necessarily so supportive. I'm going to ride transit even if it isn't as good as it should be, because I fundamentally think transit is important. But you can't expect that a mother who has, a single mother who has to take care of her kids is going to not drive and take a slower or less reliable commute just out of the goodness of her heart. Okay, that's just not reasonable. And so making transit good is critical. And I think that transit agencies should welcome criticism until there's no criticism left to be had. And so, yeah, it's frustrating. And it feels frustrating to reach out to your local city organizations who you do pay taxes for, and to never hear back from them. So yeah, frustrating. Yeah, that was a big element of frustration for me over the years. Because it's also a system that I spent a lot of time on, so I feel a level of connection to it. Let me see. How do you think average citizens can change transit in our cities? Advocate. Go to public meetings and the like. If you could make a transit system carriage your office for the day, what one would you choose, says Paige. I wouldn't choose the Montreal Metro, Paige, because there's no air conditioning, and I would be uncomfortable because of that. Probably like Hong Kong MTR carriage. Lots of room, strong air conditioning. I like it cold. So that's probably my pick. But yeah, nice to see you, Paige. Yeah, I enjoyed the Ontario Housing series. It was really good. I think Ulrich is saying the SkyTrain in Vancouver is a model that Toronto should try to emulate. I couldn't agree more. And this is exactly my frustration with Toronto, is that if you talk to an average Toronto transit person about Vancouver, they probably don't know much about it. And that's really frustrating. You should know about the other transit systems in your country, especially if you work in transit, because those are your best comparables. They're the ones who are facing the same issues as you are and who are potentially open to the same successes. And the insular nature of Toronto is very frustrating. So, moving. So yeah, that was a big part. The access to video making material. I want to say to Centric Cashew, the TTC didn't not allow me, and I want to be clear about that. And the TTC doesn't need to allow me. They just never even responded to me. Like, I sent them lots of emails. I reached out to all kinds of people, my city councilor, everyone, and I never heard anything back. Maybe the reason is I've been too negative about the TTC, which I don't think is the case. But if that was if that was the case, no one told me. um, let's go over. Let's go over here. So, as I mentioned in my Substack article, part of the reason for moving is that Toronto is just crazy expensive. So I guess since I'm not living there, I can say my very small one-bedroom apartment in Christie Pitts, and when I say very small, I mean very small. Like, you could not fully walk around the bed in the bedroom. Cost over $2,000 per month for a one-bedroom. It's just impossible to reasonably do that on a YouTube salary. I think people have this assumption that YouTube is this incredibly profitable venture, and that might be the case if you're like kind of gunning to make viral videos, which I'm just not. I'm not going to, I don't know, do transit pranks or something. And so my YouTube channel is always going to have a semi-limited audience. And so it's just impossible to pay crazy rent like that on a YouTube salary. I don't do merch. I don't do a lot of those extremely profitable ventures. And my YouTube channel is just not the biggest YouTube channel in the world, right? Like, it's 20% the size of Not Just Bikes, maybe slightly more than that. So it's just a smaller channel, right? And Toronto rent plus Toronto frustration just couldn't make it work. That's fine. It doesn't feel like a failure or anything. I just think that it's a big problem if Toronto wants to be a successful city, and Toronto needs to be because it's such an important city for Canada. And there's knock-on effects. Again, as I said in my article, if you want to hire people to help you with your YouTube channel, how are you going to do that in Toronto? Because in Toronto, the actual price of rent means that everyone else needs to pay the rent or needs to pay to live somewhere, and it's incredibly expensive for them as well. So it's very, very difficult. Let me go over here. Yeah, that's kind of why I moved, basically, in a nutshell. Love Toronto, but expensive. Sort of feel like not super welcome. And because YouTube is just difficult, and doing that in Toronto was like playing Toronto living on hard mode. Honestly, I'm an anxious person, and the idea of trying to live month to month on YouTuber salary, just so stressful, destructive to mental health. Because to put it in perspective, my income from YouTube in December was twice my income from YouTube last month. So you have to plan this unbelievable inconsistent income that just kind of goes all over the place, and it's just so difficult and stressful. And you're like, oh my god, will I make my rent next month? Will I be able to pay all of my obligations? YouTube is also not like that cheap to do, right? You need nice cameras and microphones and stuff like that to be able to make your videos. And so yeah, it's very difficult. Unfortunate. And this is all while working nights and weekends, even as I release less videos. So now I'm doing 2 per week. I was doing 4 per week for a long time, for several years. YouTube is just never ending. There's so much work to do. It expands to fill the time that you allot it. Writing scripts takes a lot of time. Writing Substack articles takes a lot of time. Editing, replying to emails, doing live streams, replying to messages, logistics of various sorts, filming videos, which is stressful and tiring and sort of uncomfortable. All of this takes a lot of work, and so doing it in Toronto was difficult, and it's not sustainable. So this is part of the challenge. But that's the rant on YouTube. So what do I want to do with this move? Well, I want to do more videos in various places. I'm planning on traveling, hopefully more. We shall see. I want to try to do an international trip every year, but again, YouTuber salary, it's a little difficult. But maybe somewhere else in Europe or maybe Asia this year, if possible. Uh, I also want to do more behind the scenes if I can. I think the Stadler video was awesome, and I want to do more stuff like that. I think it's a win for everyone. Stadler gets to show off their cool trains. I get to see a cool train factory and show all of you guys. It's awesome. Um, so yeah, that is something I want to be doing a lot more of, and just even traveling around Canada and filming more systems. Get some flights, head in. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Uh, I also want to get more involved in advocating for specific projects that I'm interested in. I did a video, and yeah, Australia, of course. I need to get. I think Australia is in 2024 though, so I can hit a bunch of the projects: Metro Tunnel, Sydney Metro, City and Southwest, Auckland City Rail Link. Auckland is basically in Australia, right? And Brisbane Cross River Rail, all of that stuff. I think it'll be awesome. Um, I also want to, as I said, get more involved in advocating specific projects. I wrote an article recently about tram trains and a specific project where they could make a lot of sense in Canada, and I think that doing more projects like that would be tons of fun. Talking to local advocates, talking to cities, etc., and trying to do more videos like that. I think it would be great. I met with some city councilors from Mississauga a while back, and it was really awesome to just kind of talk about, hey, like Mississauga is a city with nearly a million people. There's so much potential for awesome transit here, and you could really show Toronto the way because Toronto has some serious issues. So I think that's really exciting. I'm trying to just be open to opportunities. Hey, you want to go speak at this event? Yeah, I'll try to do that. Hey, you want to do this? Yeah, sure. I'm gonna try to take more of those. I'm also working on the book. If you're not familiar, I'm writing a book about public transportation, public rail transportation in particular. It's kind of like a manual, everything I know about urban rail and kind of rail in general in a book. It will be pretty long, pretty technical, hopefully with some nice drawings and diagrams. Maybe kind of like a nice coffee table book, unclear, but it's going to be great. I've written a lot of that already, and that's another project I'm working on. I'm just going to reply to a few comments here. My throat is getting rather dry, so. Okay, good. Paige says, serious question. The STM seems to be digging a ventilation shaft near my house. It's a pretty big operation, but I don't even think they're putting in an elevator at the same time. Why? It's possible that the ventilation shaft is between stations, in which case elevator might not be practical. But yeah, like consolidating smaller projects can be helpful, but at the same time, sometimes if they make it a smaller project, it's like just a ventilation shaft, they can get more bidders and more competitive bids, lower cost. But if it's right on top of the station, they're already digging things up, yeah, they should probably put an elevator in. Um, and sometimes it's really silly jurisdictional things, like maybe often money is set aside for certain things, and you cannot use the elevator money for ventilation, and you cannot use the ventilation money for elevators. That would just not be allowed. So that is a real problem. Going through this. Tina from the train club here. Can you show me a model you got from Stadler, or is it top secret? Gonna have to be top secret for now, but potentially in the future. I would buy the book. Well, that is really exciting for me. Also, thank you for the super chat, Tina. I appreciate it. Go check out the Toronto Model Railway Club. It's very cool, actually. I went out recently to check it out. Will it be an ebook? I want to do both ebook and like a paper copy. Because yeah, I read ebooks, but having the actual physical book is kind of nice, right? The reason I don't like ebooks is because it means I'm on an electronic device, which is extremely distracting. So that's nice and enjoyable. I did not reveal where I moved. I don't really know if I'm going to yet. I haven't decided because there are, let's say, sometimes concerns that people have about being doxxed, etc. And that definitely happened in the past, and it's a crappy part of being a public figure. Uh, so not going to talk about that for now. Sucks, but yeah, there was a famous website about doxing people that I think is gone now, but was on there at one point. Really not nice. Terrible experience. Would not recommend. Um, Signed copy of the book. That actually sounds like an interesting opportunity. Maybe I should do that. Stadler Flirt versus Siemens Velaro. Who would win? We're in the Q&A section now, folks. So if you have questions, feel free to send them in. Kind of talked about all my other topics for the day. Siemens Velaro is a high-speed train. The Stadler Flirt is like a regional train, completely different. I don't think you can really compare them. What do you think of P3s or PPPs, public-private partnerships? I don't have the same opinions a lot of people on them. They're just a tool. There's a lot of different methods of procuring projects. They've all had successful projects, bad projects. The most cost-effective potential way you can build a project does not involve or minimizes the involvement of the private sector, who obviously has to make money. But as I kind of talked about with the IBX, sometimes pragmatic considerations and political considerations make different models more practical than others. I'm not going to talk about Salt Lake City today, but I will say I'm going to make a video about it because I was there touring Stadler. So stay tuned for a video about it. Yeah, I think it'll be good. Super high capacity metro system. The best rolling stock would be what you see in Hong Kong. Go check out my Hong Kong MTR video about that. Yeah, I don't think P3s are panaceas. I don't think anything is a panacea. I just don't think that they're also this like doomed to fail thing. Maybe I'll cover MARTA. I obviously got to see their beautiful new train cars at Stadler, and those looked great. So, yeah. And I would honestly choose the Siemens. No, not sorry. I would choose the Flirt over the Desiro. Someone mentioned that they think Stadler's designs kind of look boxy. I don't disagree, but I still like the designs, and I do think that the more modern Flirt design, like the ones that Greater Anglia has, they look so good. But all of their designs I like, and it is sort of awkward to do a tour of a particular manufacturer. But the reality is that I always thought Stadler stuff was really good. If you've watched my videos for years, you'll know I typically point out their trains when they appear because I think they just look really nice. They're really practical, etc. Violence seems to have increased on the TTC. I was wondering if you could make a video about safety on transit, how it affects ridership, etc. I think it's less about safety itself and more about a perception of safety. I don't know. As someone who feels like I feel like I'm a pretty practical person, driving always feels extremely dangerous to me because there are a ton of car crashes every day. I feel much safer riding transit, and the thing is too, with transit, you're not driving the vehicle, but you have a lot more agency to, I would say, keep yourself safe. If you're feeling uncomfortable, you can try to like walk to a different part of a subway train or walk out of a station or whatever. Whereas if you're in a car with someone, they are just driving crazy. It's very hard for you to do anything. So that's sort of my thinking. Safety can be a complex issue. Where would you like to see Andy Byford next? TransLink would be awesome. He could turn TransLink from an awesome system into just the best, I think. What do you think about diesel light rail like the NJ River Line? I wouldn't call it diesel light rail. It's sort of like an interurban style line that has some street running. It's not really light rail, in my opinion. I think it's okay, but let's try not use diesel. Even battery would be better, honestly. I prefer battery to diesel, but overhead lines, they're really not that complicated. Do them in more places. Do you think that existing transit agencies have been too slow to adopt automation for existing grade-separated lines? Probably, but also the places we're talking about are different. In America, it's been very slow, but in Europe and Asia, the uptake has been much faster, and Canada too. Yeah, so it's interesting. Do you think it would be a bad idea if Metrolinx took over the TTC and became fully integrated for the region? Oh yeah, Metrolinx is sponsoring me, so that's why I'm wearing the hat, right? This is lots of money here. No, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I just have this hat, and it felt appropriate to wear something transit related. Um, I think creating a single unified regional transit agency is a very attractive idea, but I think it's much more complicated than just putting it all under one agency. It would certainly solve some problems, but I think that it might sort of seem like a tool. It might seem like a panacea. Hey, if we just make it all one agency, it will work great, and that might not be the case. So I think that we need to ask more fundamental questions than that. Um, you are not necessarily in the demographic that would be bothered by people like that. It's totally true. In terms of people who are going to feel unsafe on transit, I am not in the demographic that will feel the least safe on transit. But at the same time, I'm just as able to perceive things as other people. And so I certainly know that transit has felt less safe for people. I'm simply making a comparison against driving, which I would say applies broadly. Transit still is quite safe in terms of the amount of serious incidents that happen compared to people in cars. And so, while I understand there are certain areas where I'm just not going to be able to comment because of who I am, I still think that those kind of statistics apply. I'm not really planning on doing a video on the private rail companies of Japan, but I'll do more videos on Japan for sure. Is Brightline West's plan to start service in 2027 realistic? Probably challenging. I don't think they've laid any infrastructure, and I don't know how that's going, so probably not. Brightline video definitely, but probably should just do it in person. Do you think Via HSR should be extended to Detroit? No, I don't think it should really extend beyond Toronto for now. I think Toronto to Montreal starting phase, and then extend beyond there in the future. I think that would be the most reasonable course of action. Yeah, the monorail thing for LA is incredibly silly. Do you have a side job or a PhD? No, but interesting opportunities would be interesting in both cases. Do you plan to talk about Fukuoka in Japan? I would like to, of course. Yes. I am a full time YouTuber, though. Correct. Let me see. I'm gonna end the stream at 30 past the hour. So yeah, let me know. So 7:30, or I'm sorry, 6:30. So yeah, let me know if you have any more questions. Shoot them. Otherwise, yeah, stream will end in 5 minutes. Cool. I'm gonna try to do streams more regularly again, but again with more structure and with more a key topic that I talk about at least for a portion of the stream. Do you think the Eglinton Crosstown will open this year? 50% chance of it opening this year, I would say, but it would be late this year. That's my guess. I really don't know. I love Ion Light Rail. Would love to see it get extended. Will you be there for the REM opening? Of course. Do you plan to collab with Johnny Strides when you visit Toronto again? Yeah, Johnny's great, for sure. Would you do a video on all of the Penn Station and Northeast Corridor projects? There are so many to keep track of. I would say that's something that like Alan should do. Alan's on the Northeast Corridor, so I feel like it would be more appropriate for someone like him. I would love to do a video on the metro in Lahore, but I don't know anyone there. So if you do and you want to send me some video clips of it so I can put together a nice looking video, yeah, email me, and I would love to make a video. Why did you pick panacea? I just think it's a good word for what it's describing. Thanks for sharing this, Reese. I appreciate a lot of your work. Thanks. I appreciate you for watching. Will you be staying in Canada? I won't comment on where I am or might be in the future. Michael Hansen says, "Hey Reese, it's with a C, not an S, but I'll forgive you on this one. Thank you for the super chat. I'm really excited about the new MARTA trains and feel the system is heavily underutilized and has a lot of potential. I definitely think it does have a lot of potential. I think more suburban extensions are desperately needed, and beat the other systems. Platform screen doors. You already have nicer trains that are going to be fully walked through potentially ahead of a lot of systems. So just go that extra mile, get platform screen doors, and really show the other systems in North America how it's done." Paige says, "Where would you live if you moved to Montreal?" Not that you have. I think it would be cool to live along the REM. I like the REM a lot. Perhaps around Edouard Montpetit. I think that'd be really cool. I kind of like that area. It's I like the mountain. I really enjoy climbing up and down it endlessly. So yeah, that would be great. I think that would be the neighborhood I would choose, but potentially your neighborhood, Paige, because I wouldn't mind running into you from time to time. To what extent do you think that having a small street running section on the IBX could impact its reliability? Well, if it's one section, if it's in the middle, then every train could be impacted. I mean, if there are crossing gates, which I don't think there will be, you're asking, should there be crossing gates? Crossing gates are great. They give you 100% priority, but cars can still block the tracks. Stuff can get stuck. Just asking for problems. Pedestrians can get hit. There's just more risk, and for a high capacity line, that risk is just not worth it. Well, if you want Stadler to give me a tour of other Stadler facilities, definitely watch the video, like it, and comment that. Say, hey, Stadler, get him into more facilities. I'd love to do that. Luke, I'm not talking about where I am moved. Yes. Any chance of an updated version of your removed Vancouver streetcar video? Yeah, it was removed. If you didn't know, I removed a lot of videos last year, and I've kind of remade a lot of them. The streetcar one hasn't been, but you know what, Ned? Just for you, I'll write down streetcar video. It's on my list. I'll try to remake it at some point, hopefully sooner than later. Nouveau Cost says, this reminds me of the Witness Protection Program. I could be deep underground in a bunker right now, for all you know. What do you think of criticism that transit and urban advocates sometimes come across as elitist? Totally fair criticism. In a lot of places, it's super unaffordable to live in a place where you don't need a car. Even if in some places that's actually a more affordable way to live. And I certainly understand how it could come across that way, even if it isn't necessarily true. So that's my perspective on that. As someone who grew up in a rural area, I think that there isn't always enough understanding to go around. Will you ever collab with Downey Live again? Yeah, I talk to Mike fairly regularly, and we will definitely do a video again at some point. He's Mr. Worldwide, so I have to pin him down. I am willing to consider moving to a Pineapple Under the Sea if it has cantaloupe trains to it. Yes. Do you want to visit Paris in 2024 during the Olympics? During the Olympics, I don't know. The Olympics are insane. It's hectic. I don't know if I really want to, if I want to do that. I was saying to someone before, I don't play PS5. My wife does. I'm not really a gamer as much as I would like to spend a little bit of time maybe playing City Skylines. Too busy with YouTube. So no. And I think I'll say that's it for today's stream. Thanks everyone for coming out. Thank you so much for watching the channel. It means a lot to me. Your support is why I get to do what I do, and that is such a huge blessing to me. So thank you, and have a great week, I guess. Yes, have a great week. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.